We continue living in a divided world with many peoples, each seeking their own goals and hopes and dreams and forming communities together. And so it is in that spirit that, again, let's try to figure out what is virtue. And at least for the moment, we'll continue our study of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Thanks again to Allandale Online Publishing. And we can discover that even in something as not so subtle as war, there can be such a thing as virtue. So let's move on to chapter 2, maybe even chapter 3. Waging war. Sun Tzu said, in the operations of war, where there are in the field 1,000 swift chariots, as many heavy chariots, and 100,000 mail-clad soldiers, with provisions enough to carry them 1,000 li, many miles. The expenditure at home and at the front, including entertainment of guests, small items such as glue and paint, and sums spent on chariots and armor, will reach the total of 1,000 ounces of silver per day. Such is the cost of raising an army of 100,000 men. When you engage in actual fighting, if victory is long in coming, then men's weapons will grow dull, and their armor will be or their spirit will be damped. If you lay siege to a town, you will exhaust your strength. Again, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. So, right out of the gate, we learn that war is costly, not just in blood, but in all these expenses that are the practical measures of upkeep of an army over a distance. Now, when your weapons are dulled, your ardor damped, your strength exhausted, and your treasure spent, other chieftains will spring up to take advantage of your extremity. Then no man, however wise, will be able to avert the consequences that must ensue. Thus, though we have heard of stupid haste in war, cleverness has never been seen associated with long delays. There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. At least in Sun Tzu's time, the way we understood countries, and the way we understand expenses and states and such, there's no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. It's a terribly inefficient thing to prolong warfare unnecessarily. Moving on. It's only one who's thoroughly acquainted with the evils of war that can thoroughly understand the profitable way of carrying it on. The skillful soldier does not raise a second levy, neither are his supply wagons loaded more than twice. A levy being a tax or toll that it takes for you to get your supplies moved. Bring war material with you from home, but forage on the enemy. Thus the army will have food enough for its needs. Poverty of the state exchequer, the person who is responsible for treasury and making payments, causes an army to be maintained by contributions from a distance. Contributing to maintain an army at a distance causes the people to become impoverished. On the other hand, the proximity of an army causes prices to go up, and high prices cause the people's substance to be drained away. When their substance is drained away, the peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of the people will be stripped bare, and 3/10 of their income will be dissipated, while government expenses for broken chariots, worn-out horses, breastplates and helmets, bows and arrows, spears and shields, protective mantles, draught oxen, and heavy wagons will amount to 4/10 of its total revenue. Hence, a wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy. 1 cartload of the enemy's provisions is equivalent to 20 of one's own, and likewise a single picule of his provender is equal to 20 from one's own store. I'm not familiar with this term, PICUL, but it's some sort of supply. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. Therefore, in chariot fighting, when 10 or more chariots have been taken, those should be rewarded who took the first. Our own flags should be substituted for those of the enemy, and the chariots mingled in conjunction with ours. The captured soldiers should be kindly treated and kept. This is called using the conquered foe to augment one's own strength. In war, then, let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. Again, this is assuming a unified state. This is a much simpler model, but it is certainly true that like a state that prolongs its own warfare rather than seeking victory is doing itself a disservice, even if actors within this state individually profit. If they drain the state might no longer be able to support them. Thus may it be known that the leader of armies is the arbiter of the people's fate. The man on whom it rests depends whether the nation shall be in peace or in peril. There's a lot to process here, right? So, again, I lead into this saying that we're talking about war as a place to talk about virtue. There are so many other areas one could talk about virtue, but if we can understand war, perhaps we can understand virtue in other contexts later. Certainly being efficient with one's resources, not being inefficient about how your supplies are drawn around, that there is a need to tax the people, but if you prolong a war, you will tax people at a distance, and they will get tired of paying the taxes. And they might seek to no longer be part of your state, but may be captured and join a different state. On the other hand, people don't want like war close to home, as this makes supplies costly, food and supplies and other such materials. So people are glad to pay to keep war out of their neighborhood. And there's this other problem that those who are actually performing the fighting, like, they have to have weapons and horses and other such things. To the extent that you can benefit from those that your adversary just leaves lying around, or that you're able to capture, so much the better. At least if the weapons are of any quality. So, there is an efficiency even in commanders and armies making use of enemies' resources, whether it's foraging for resources or food or anything of that sort. I guess this is from an era before we realized or acknowledged that disease has ways of spreading. That's a rather complicated topic about, I don't know, if something could be poisoned and left behind and you accept it. Like, if you're accepting goods of dubious quality that end up hurting you, I guess there's a skill in recognizing which things are beneficial and which things are just going to backfire if you take them. But, yeah, over the centuries, other factors not mentioned in this document could weigh in as well. Pardon me. Yeah, and when the substance of the people are drained away, The peasantry will be afflicted by, oh, it said heavy exactions. So if you're performing heavy taxes on peasantry, they can't afford to pay whatever food or resources you're demanding. Um, yeah, everybody's spirit will be damped. What's not said in this chapter is that if you are overwhelmingly successful in battle or war, if you're incredibly efficient, there's nothing here saying that you're going to be handsomely rewarded for that. Yes, there's a need to be efficient over time. Yes, there's a need to not heavily tax your own people, but if you're the most sage, wise leader of an army, and if your people are extraordinarily happy with you, sure, the history books may look favorably upon you, but there's nothing in this document that says that, like, being extremely efficient is better than just being as efficient as you need to be. There does come some limit to how, I don't know, how much some of these efficiency factors matter. And other factors that were mentioned in Chapter 1 might weigh more heavily as circumstances change. But yeah, you want to make use of the resources that are available, foraging on the enemy, capturing the enemies, and reusing their own soldiers and such for your own. So, yeah, with that, I thought it was also interesting. I did skim over the next chapter, and I think this is equally applicable, and this flows very nicely from the previous chapter. So let's take these two together. 3. Attack by stratagem. Sun Tzu said, in the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. So too it is better to recapture an army than to destroy it, to capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company than to destroy them. Hence, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the army's resistance without fighting. Thus, the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. The next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces. The next is to order the attack in the enemy's army in the field. And the worst policy is to besiege walled cities. The rule is not to besiege walled cities if it can possibly be avoided. Preparation of mantlets, movable shelters, and various implements of war will take up 3 whole months, and the piling up of mounds over against the walls will take 3 months more. So, yeah, it makes sense if you can absorb the enemy, whether it's an enemy state and its people, whether it's their soldiers, whether it's detachments from the army that are just having a bad time. If you can persuade them to join your forces, this is a much better thing. If you can conquer the opposing state's spirit without even fighting, you've achieved diplomacy. That's a wonderful thing to have peace, however temporary it may be. The longer it can be, the more you can profit from it. Moving on, the general, unable to control his irritation with the siege, will launch his men to the assault like swarming ants. The result that 1/3 of his men are slain, while the town still remains untaken. Such are the disastrous effects of a siege. Therefore, the skillful leader subdues the enemy's troops without any fighting. He captures their cities without laying siege to them. He overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. Now, we just heard in Chapter 2 about like if an enemy is overtaxing their people, that their spirit may be crushed. And we heard the relative costs of maintaining an army and what people may be willing to pay resource-wise in order to upkeep an army and to keep the battle far from home. Here we see reiterated that capturing a city without even laying siege is best, whether that's through military influence or whether that's through political influence. Like, an enemy city may be willing to be captured in some strange circumstances with a state that's dysfunctional. Moving on, with his forces intact, he will dispute the mastery of the empire, and thus, without losing a man, his triumph will be complete. This is the method of attacking by stratagem. It is the rule in war: if our forces are 10 to the enemy's 1 to surround him, if 5 to 1 to attack him, if twice as numerous to divide our army into 2. Right, so I don't know if this refers to the notion of attacking, well, 10 to 1 to surround the enemy, 5 to 1 to attack him. I don't understand this rule. What I was thinking of is that you can have a military operation if you could have the opponent's army attack them from multiple directions at once. Perhaps this is what we mean by divide the army into 2. That it's difficult for an opponent to deal with such a thing. Okay, moving on. If we are equally matched, we can offer battle. If slightly inferior in numbers, we can avoid the enemy. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. Hence, though an obstinate fight may be made by a small force, in the end, it must be captured by the larger force. Now the general is the bulwark of the state. If the bulwark is complete at all points, the state will be strong. If the bulwark is defective, the state will be weak. So if you have the general who defects, or is otherwise just not up to the demands of the state, it will, if you have an unskilled general, I suppose, or a skilled general that still has their own vices, the state will not be as strong as it could be. So let's move on. Maybe it'll explain better. There are 3 ways in which a ruler can bring misfortune upon his army. First, by commanding the army to advance or to retreat, being ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey. This is called hobbling the army, trying to command them to do things that are just not possible to do. Second, by attempting to govern an army in the same way as administering a kingdom, being ignorant of the conditions which obtain in an army. This causes restlessness in the soldiers' minds. So, like, even within an army, there's some notion of who's leading each unit and who's leading those combinations of units, and like, people live and die through the decisions that an army makes. And you need to be able to inspire your army to believe that you are doing the right thing in a way that works as best as it can, in a way that meets the needs of the people and is sensitive to their needs and has a chance to succeed. Third, by employing the officers of his army without discrimination, through ignorance of military principle of adaptation to circumstances. This is the third way to bring misfortune upon an army, by shaking the confidence of the soldiers. So in this case, discrimination is not a negative term here. If what this refers to is not what we contemporarily refer to as discrimination, but the ability to differentiate skilled leadership from weak leadership or observant leadership from less than observant leadership. For, like, if people are to be governed, if army units are to be governed by those who just are not sensitive to circumstances and how they affect combat, if these officers are promoted without regard to their effectiveness, the soldiers will question what's going on. Likewise, you can have great officers, but if you yourself are incompetent to what's going on, this is the second point that we're talking about, then if you're not aware of shorter term things like supplies being low, food being low, costs being accrued by the army rather than paid out in a way that's equitable, these are things that the soldiers may observe and care about, and that their families may observe and care about, and their communities and so forth. But yeah, the first way is if you try to command your army to do things that they obviously cannot do. And this perhaps is more easily applied to sport. Like if you're playing a computer game or a video game or even a real life sport, commanding a team to take a certain shape or formation and then trying to direct them in that shape to do things that the shape just doesn't do effectively. You're hobbling your army by commanding them to try to do two things at once. It makes more sense to realize what are the circumstances in a combat so you can lead effectively. Moving on. But when the army is restless and distrustful, trouble is sure to come from other feudal princes. This is simply bringing anarchy into the army and flinging away victory. So, yeah, whether it's through truth or through rather skillful deception, it's important that the army not be restless and that they trust in you and your officers. I assume back in the day, word of mouth spread pretty quickly. I don't know for certain, but yeah, if the army trusts you, hopefully that means you're doing the right thing. Trust once broken is hard to regain. That said, you can lead a state in a way that, I don't know, CGP Cray alludes to this, that rulers, like those in charge of a pirate crew, they make clear to whom their allegiances lie. And you can have a rather tenuous leadership over a smaller group. But as a group grows and grows, you will need to have the support of all the people supporting you. And the people supporting you will need their support from the people who support them. So it's difficult to have an army that rests easily and trusts when you've done something egregious to break trust. So let's move on here. Thus, we may know that there are 5 essentials for victory. First, he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Second, he will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. Third, he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. Fourth, he will win who prepared himself waits to take the enemy unprepared. Fifth, he will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. So, hence the saying, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Powerful words. So, I think this is a logical construction upon after chapter 2, which talks about the economy of war. There's also this notion of an attack through stratagem. If you can win without fighting, that's the best thing to do. It's important to, in war, pay attention to all the circumstances, both locally as well as over a distance, both temporal, like short term and long term. And it's funny in some way, many of these principles very easily apply to strategy games as well, such as chess, such as Go and Shogi, even if the rules differ somewhat. Like there's a funny well, I mean the way that this chapter ends. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. The modern quip about this is never interrupt an opponent while he is making a mistake. I forget if that's something we also heard in chapter 1. Maybe it is. But yeah, the better you understand what you're doing, of course, the better that will go. But that's only half the battle. If you know yourself but you don't know the enemy, for every victory gained, you'll also suffer defeat. So it's important to be attentive not only to your own army's needs, but also attentive to, like, what is my adversary doing? How are they planning to do things? What are they thinking, if you can even predict that? And if you can predict that, then a next extension is to figure out, like, okay, this is what they're trying to do. Is that a good idea? And further, of course, you should question your own tactics and strategies and see, like, okay, here's how I'm breaking down the circumstances in my camp. Here are the goals my army are trying to achieve. Are any of these goals realistic? If so, when might I expect to succeed at such things? And yeah, this not only applies to these kinds of strategy games, but it occurs to me, like, even video games and computer games. They're about war simulation or combat simulation. This equally well applies. Like, it feels a bit embarrassing or shameful or ridiculous to suggest it, but all these people playing modern warfare games, whether it's on your favorite video game console or any of these online games where, like, friends are just hanging out, they're in a room yelling at each other, or you're on a video call or an audio call yelling into a mic, cursing out your teammate for having done the wrong thing. I joke, but, like, these things happen because people are passionate. They want good things to happen. Like, there's argument, even in the course of these video games, of what is it our team should be doing? When do we think it's going to happen? What are our chances of being successful? And so forth. Like, these are very logical things that many players argue about. And people have different perspectives and different levels of experience and so forth. And like the tactics of battle are fairly blunt. But if you can win without battling, that's even better. If you see an adversary doing something absolutely ridiculous and committing all their resources in a way that's not going to help them be effective at achieving their goals, or it's stopping you from achieving your goals, don't provoke them. Let them continue making their mistake and not learning from it. Um, that's what here actually, yeah, this by commanding the army to advance or to retreat, becoming ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey, is called hobbling the army. So, yeah, I guess that's what in modern terms we've translated to say, like, do not interrupt an opponent who's making a mistake. Um, but yeah, there's also modern video games and computer games where teams are dynamic. There's infamous examples of people abandoning their team in times of need. And this obviously creates restlessness in the minds of your team to the point where you might not be part of that team anymore. And many people observing might watch you and choose to not associate with you and your team in the future. So it's important to try to do the right thing in those highly dynamic situations too. But yeah, also through promoting incompetent officers. If you're paying too much heed to those who cannot produce results, and if you're ignoring those who can produce results, this too shakes confidence in your soldiers. But when the army, wait, how's this read? But when the army is restless and distrustful, trouble is sure to come from the other feudal princes. This is simply bringing anarchy into the army and flinging victory away. I'm confused by the translation here. So I think what this means is that if other feudal princes see that your state is weak, they will seize upon this opportunity that you are handing to them. So even if you otherwise would have had a chance at success, yeah, be aware everybody's watching and try to do the right thing, because if you don't, you're not only hurting yourself, but other groups of feudal princes will take advantage as well. That said, in our modern world, like, these other feudal princes might have ways that they take advantage, but you're able to pay them off or something in a way that weakens your state, but doesn't necessarily cripple you forever. I am a bit interested in, I don't know, we always talk about this art of war in a one nation versus one nation sort of context. But if you suddenly have 7 or 8 nations and you're playing diplomacy, things get a bit tricky. Uh, I don't know why people enjoy this game, Diplomacy. It seems extraordinarily challenging and stressful, but it does give people a chance to express themselves in a way that, like, reality might not. So maybe that's why people play it. But yeah, sieging, You can be successful with a siege in one sense of the word. You can achieve a military victory, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory if it's successful. Even if you successfully take the city and its resources, it's such an immense cost to take that. So it's better to identify the weaknesses in the other feudal camps. And yeah, better to recapture an army than to destroy it, or to capture a regiment or a detachment or a company than to destroy them. Likewise, we heard in chapter 2, like foraging for resources. It's better to take resources. Um, in a military situation, you just go ahead and take these from the opposing states to live off the land rather than sending supplies from afar. That might not always be possible, but to the extent it is, it's profitable to do that. But likewise, capturing groups. And like this is talking about a state and its political influence. It's not talking about religion. But I do wonder if religion might fall in a similar category. That seems complicated, so we don't need to worry about that today. But yeah, besieging a city is immensely expensive. So a skillful leader will subdue the enemy's troops without fighting. Yeah, if the enemy's troops if they're suffering morale-wise, you may be able to easily capture a city without siege. Or if, I don't know, if you see an adversarial general that you can provoke out into the field, while they're out in the field, you might sneak in your second army and take the city, or something of that sort. Or, like through political influence, you might be able to say, hey, do you guys just want to join us? Because we outnumber you, and this sort of thing. But yeah, there was this point in this chapter, if we have 10 forces to the enemy's 1 surround him, if 5 to 1, then we attack the enemy. If they're twice as numerous, we divide our army into 2. I don't understand it. Maybe it makes more sense to some of you. Certainly, if you have the forces to completely surround the enemy, do it. Sure. That guarantees victory quite easily. If you heavily outnumber 5 to 1, still performing an attack in hopes of a surrender certainly makes some sense to me. Only the most obstinate opponent, I think, would fail to surrender in such a case. I don't understand this point. If we are twice as numerous as them, why do we divide our army into 2? I think it's just to give us more flexibility in how we handle conditions. But yeah, if we're inferior in numbers, or frankly in skill, or resources, or anything of that sort, we can likewise hope to flee from combat. There isn't a point made about, like, what if you're outnumbered? Is surrender a reasonable thing to do? There's so much mention about keeping harmony and making sure that your army is unified and that you're promoting the right officers and that you lead with skill. There isn't a mention of, like, if you are really on the back foot here, if you have no chance whatsoever, or if you have only the slimmest chance, at what point does your loyalty to the state erode? I think that's a reflection on the leader of the army. And yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. Surrender is never really addressed here, but if a ruler does bring misfortune upon their army, I suppose the army at that point may consider surrendering more easily. But if a ruler is effective and they're exhibiting their best skill, then only in the worst conditions, which I suppose could still happen. You could have a famine, you could have a drought, you could have so many terrible things besiege your state that the army you might not be able to support anymore. Like if some act of God occurs that just ruins the loyalty of your army and your people, I suppose at some point surrender does become necessary. But I don't think I ever seen. We're 3 chapters into this. We're not seeing any mention of that. And yet, in our strategy games, there does come a point where we acknowledge our futility and the opponent's success. But that's not mentioned here. Maybe resignation in a single game, whether it's chess or shogi or go or something like that, maybe resignation is just an indication that, okay, they win this game, they've played very well, they're successful, they're skillful. However, we can raise our spirits and play again another day because this is just a simulation. But yeah, it's interesting that resignation is not in any way directly mentioned here. We hear about your weapons being dulled, your spirit or ardor damped, your strength exhausted, and treasure spent, and so forth, that your adversaries will take advantage of your weakness. So, yeah, although there is such a thing as stupid haste in war and unskillful battle, long delays in war has never been associated with cleverness either. What else was raised in these chapters here? When the substance is drained away, the peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. Yeah. Yeah, war is a costly thing. I do wonder. So, Chapter 2 talks about the economy of war. And I did mention how, like, if your nation is prosperous, you'll have glory and fame and all that, and the loyalty of a people. But if the nation is not quite as prosperous, but is still doing well, you'll still have all that same level of fame, won't you? Like, there is some return on... there's some point beyond which further prosperity is just... It's a joyful and peaceful thing. But it's not going... I'm thinking by analogy, like if you're playing a chess game and you promote all your pawns, whether you take 8 knights or 8 queens, it's not going to make a huge difference. There comes some point at which, like, this abundance doesn't make one any more virtuous. But conversely, if you do not have enough resources, if resources are not well allocated and spent, then you don't have a working economy. So, I guess flipping that on its head, you do want to try to meet the needs of your army and your state, your people. And they will demand many things. And you need to deliver those that are essential for the ongoing nature of your army and your state. That's not to say you need to deliver on everything. You need to deliver in a way that satisfies everybody, but not beyond that. Should I use the word satisfy or satiate or sate? Something that says, like, you're doing what you can with the resources that you have, and people see the way in which you're doing it, and it's fair. Um, and sure, if there were an unlimited supply of resources, um, then allocating out everything in a way you could still, through being too generous, you could be disproportionately generous to some officers as opposed to others. And this could break the spirit of those in the state. So if you have a surplus, you don't necessarily want to distribute it, unless you can do so in a way that's equitable. I don't think that's a common condition, but on the flip side of that, even if you're quite strained for resources, you do need to do your best allocating them out. Um, People will enjoy the enemy army not being in their home, not foraging in their vicinity, but likewise, people who haven't seen an enemy army in a long time might get tired of paying taxes and might not understand what they're paying for. So, you don't just stop taxing people just because they complain. You're still continuing to deliver value, but you need to be efficient in delivering it. At least if you are the leader of the army and if you're representing the state, to the extent that you're loyal to your state, you need, for the health and well-being of the state, need to be efficient about the way you spend things. You don't fight unnecessarily. Identify what it is that your people need, what your army needs, and do so in a way that's clear with those that you promote within the army. Promote the right people, seek the right goals, doing everything in a way that's well, fairness doesn't have to factor into this, but do in a way that is well, it gains the support of the people, whether through, well, I'm not going to say through intimidation, but do things in a way that I don't know how to say it. It's not really said in this document. I don't need to explain it. But yeah, if people can understand, like if you're low on resources and you explain the circumstances and say, here's what's up and why we're in this tight situation, a state might be more sympathetic to that. Whereas if you have a surplus, don't necessarily go around broadcasting that that's the case. But yeah, you do need to continue spending in order to upkeep an army of any size. Oh, and yeah, of course, there's no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. So, if you do choose to engage in war, then don't prolong it unnecessarily. Again, I'm saying, like, if you're loyal as the leader of a state, and I assume back in the day, this loyalty was easier to figure it out than it was today. Like today, we have all kinds of ways of representing a person's wealth that are not easily to track. So those who do lead might have questionable loyalty to the state, whereas back in the day, perhaps things are more transparent when you could just when people would see you and your prosperity. I don't know. I suppose I'm not a historian like that. But yeah, the country itself does not benefit from prolonged warfare, even if perhaps some divisions within a country do profit from it. Eventually, the country itself will have problems. Um, so it's, yeah, for a state, for a country, it's useful to follow basic economic principles. Um, and there was a point in chapter 2 here that said, now to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. So people aren't going to fight for free. But further, if you can explain, if people understand why the war is ongoing and that the state is doing the right thing, that this contributes to the economy of war as well. Whereas if you have an army that's suffering morale-wise, you can pay to try to remedy, like if the army's commanded to do things that they're not. If you're hobbling your army and there's disruption in the ranks and such, you might in some ways be able to pay to remedy such disruptions, to smooth things over. And I guess bribe might be the right word there. But yeah, even after succeeding in battle, there still must be rewards from defeating the enemy. Whether it's just the reward of feeling that you've done the right thing, that your home and your family and state are protected, but also like other tribute would still be needed to be allocated for those who put their life and limb in danger. And then provide some examples. If you capture chariots of the enemy, distribute some rewards in a way that incentivizes people to be enterprising the next time around too. And yeah, try to bring around a quick victory. Don't dawdle about it. Let your great object not be a lengthy campaign, but seek out victory. And thus it may be known that the leader of armies is the arbiter of the fate of the people. And whoever they choose, if you're so fortunate as to lead them, it becomes the people depend on you to know whether the nation will be in peace or in peril. So, yeah, I guess this can also be noted, not just for your nation, but if you see in other nations, if you see somebody that is the leader of the army there, and if you know something about them, I guess that's the final point of chapter 3, that if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Because you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know their strengths, and you know their weaknesses. But if you know neither of them, you'll succumb in every battle. It's such a powerful saying. I apologize that I'm repeating myself throughout this. I just think these couple chapters, well, this entire document really, it's not something people commonly think about. I think it is something worth meditating on and discussing. And what keeps drawing my mind back to this document, aside from contemporary political things, which just seem to be everywhere, is that through strategy games, we too can see, like, effectively making use of resources. We can see protecting um, the people. We could see that an opponent might be sidelined, wasting their time capturing resources or shuffling back and forth, while we seek to make progress elsewhere. There's all kinds of parallels with strategy games, not just like video games, but even board games. It's just somewhat incredible still how, I don't know. I've had the fortune of being able to visit many chess clubs and other places where board games are played. And I see the difference between somebody who's heavily motivated, who's trying to learn something from every game, versus somebody who's easily influenced. They certainly enjoy what they're doing, but it might not be their object to improve from each game, and that's fine. Like, games are games. It's good to enjoy them. But it perplexes me, both in real life and online, to see people who claim that they're trying to learn, they're trying to do things in this virtuous way. They're trying to succeed at the games and claim that they're trying to learn each time. But what are they learning? Are they learning Sun Tzu's art of war? This economics of making sure that the right regiments of the army get the support they need? I don't think it's anything that fancy. I think it's that people are human too. There is this, it's easy to be swayed by things that are not just in writing. But if you have, like, if you're watching a video or even a live streamed content, if there's enjoyable music and lighting and sound effects, and you can see a face and a voice on the other side of it, and if it's an enjoyable party, it's fun. And that's great. And then there's this genre of content out there. It's been out there for so many years that, like, purports to be educational as well as entertaining. But it doesn't hold itself anywhere near this kind of standard that's in writing. That's this ultra serious document here. Like, and I get it. Like, people want to, if you if you have a surplus in resources, if you're not desperate to win each game, if you're not desperate to learn, you're just trying to have fun. And if you do learn some things, that's wonderful. If you can do that with your friends and your friends' friends and so forth, great. You're enjoying what you're doing. It's not, like, games are games, and some people are way more competitive with games than others, and that's fair. But yeah, on the other side of it, like, it's become so common, this trope of people saying, oh, I'm learning this or I'm learning that, and being able to demonstrate in some way, shape, or form, here's what I learned, here's how I learned it, without being able to critically assess, okay, was this thing I learned helpful? Is this something that's going to further what I'm trying to do? Or is this something that I just found enjoyable and in many cases it works out, but sometimes there's just still some critical flaws that are far beneath the surface on this. Um, and I'm not meaning to like go out there and attack all learning and all forms of entertainment and something like that. It's a rather challenging topic to talk about, but it just perplexes me. Like when I go to a real life chess club and I get to learn about people who are enjoying the Alien Gambit, and I'm like, okay, we're talking about a sideline in an opening that even an unprepared opponent could still do well against, if not for the fact that they're playing under a speedy time control where there's not enough time to think. There's many such traps out there. And like, okay, you're able to demonstrate that this is how I learned it. This is who I learned it from. In many cases, they're not even able to go that far. They're just enjoying that, hey, I learned this cool sequence, but I can't quite remember it, and it had a fun name. I'm going to go share it with all my friends who repeat this silliness of, oh yeah, that's a fun name. It's like, this is our new way of entertaining ourselves um, through the power of the internet. It's just funny how memes propagate like that. Um, but yeah, eventually at some point, um, I don't know how it becomes clear, and maybe AI will somehow help with this in the future. Yeah, this notion that, like, what's the information value that was learned from such an activity? And are some activities better in informing us than others? This was a topic that's an active research area, even among the Lichess team. We were working on a tool to help train people train themselves to improve at chess. And similar to other chess experts, there was an episode of the Perpetual Chess podcast that alluded to this. I'm blanking on the name of Frederick Friedel, proprietor of that chess-based product, also mentioned that this is an active research area and a rather challenging thing to work on. And so that's the only reason I bring up that AI might be able to help us with that, is that identifying your own weaknesses tends to be a social activity, tends to require a lot of thought and reflection and conversation to work on, unless you're so fortunate as to benefit from coaching from experts on this. But over time, perhaps even those who are just too shy to seek out coaching and such might be able to spot their own weaknesses through the benefit of improving tooling that continues to improve over time. I guess on this concept of efficiency, like, part of the reason I haven't sought out trying to, I mean, years ago, there was a question of should I play more actively with shogi in a competitive context. And I declined to join that because I believed at that time, and I think I still believe it, that our ability to grow a shogi community it's not just about our ability to compete with each other, but to also work on the tools that will help us all as a global community improve at assessing ourselves and our own skills. And I still think like our community relies on technology, and the community will follow wherever the technology leads. This seemed to be the case with Lee chess. I assume Lee Shogi will also help with development of the Shogi community. But yeah, our ability to communicate useful information and to better assess what information is useful over time is making it easier to educate ourselves and other people. Um, and day by day, that becomes easier and easier. But there's still quite a great task at learning how to be effective at that. Sorry, I keep drifting here, but yeah, I think Sun Tzu raised many interesting points about the economy of battle, but also attack through by stratagem, and recognizing the weaknesses of the leaders of other states. And it's funnily enough, again, this didn't touch on like what if you have 3 states in conflict or 4 states in conflict or even more? That's not directly addressed in these first few chapters. I hope he explains it later. But yeah, it's better to recapture an army than to destroy one. And yeah, if you are familiar with yourself and your own army, you are much more likely to succeed than an opponent who, though they have their spirit and heart in it, might not be so familiar with what's going on. I suppose it follows that if you can learn something from each game, even if the game itself upset you in some way, or even if you won the game, still try to pay attention and seek out others' opinions on how you played it. Games are useful for assessing our thought processes, and also, like, you can assess, do I agree with other people's feedback? If I do agree, why do I agree? If I disagree, why do I disagree? Am I sure that I agree with this person who sounds like they're agreeing with me, or are they talking about something different? There's just so many levels of nuance to understanding, I don't know, understanding when... Well, in shogi, there's this concept of engagement when your army makes contact with the opposing army after you've completed your opening phase, or if one of the players strikes early, this engagement has taken place. And you could question, was this a good time to do the engagement? Anyway, shogi's such an exciting game for me. I've come from a chess background, and I increasingly see people studying chess openings and seeing that study become intractably difficult to understand. And I'm hopeful that shogi can be different, that I can continue to enjoy this game for many years without fear that it's going to be just like chess, where people publish books with hundreds of pages saying play this, then this, then this, then this. And it'd be something... I'd prefer that shogi be a space where I can have general ideas and try to apply strategy and try to learn broad principles and understand better over time which principles apply best in which situations. I'm hopeful, and hopefully I'm not naive about this, that shogi can be a fertile ground for something like that. Because I think, although I could progress further in chess and I could go pro with it, it seems so unsatisfying. There are just books and videos and other lectures out there that just prescribe, if you play these 35 moves in this sequence, you can have a good game. It's just exhausting. And it's not satisfying to win a game that comes through memorization either. Um, so, anyway, this is perhaps why I'm so motivated to try to talk about virtue through battle. Um, I do think there are many other deeper subjects than these war simulations that are also things that someday I might like to touch upon in this podcast format. I don't know how I'd get the skill or gumption to do something like that, but I do perceive that, like, war is terribly unsubtle, which makes it easier to study, but more complex things I think are also worthy of study, but it's worth doing in a disciplined way. So, sorry for having rambled for so much here. Hopefully, we've enjoyed this discussion or this learning together. Hopefully, I can continue learning more in the future. And perhaps someday we'll be able to better answer a question of what is virtue, not just in the context of war, but more broadly. What does it mean to be virtuous? And how can we learn to get along better with each other? Have a good day.